Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. A while back, I went to Starbucks with my coworker. It was a late day at the office, and my coworker Tavish and I were working on a project together. Tavish and I get along well and are friends outside of work too. On this particular evening, we had been working for quite some time. Both of us were really tired and wanted to go home, but since we were almost done, we decided to take a short break and get some coffee. There's a Starbucks that's literally a 2 or 3 minute walk from the office. So, we both went downstairs and walked over to the Starbucks. After getting inside, there were a few other people there, but it wasn't too busy. We went up to the counter, ordered what we wanted, and then stood around waiting and talking about our project. A few minutes later, our orders came out. However, Tavish's order wasn't quite correct. Instead of writing Tavish on his cup, they wrote Travis, and his drink was wrong too. Realizing this, he went over and told the employee that it was incorrect. I was surprised to see that the employee didn't seem happy at all. In fact, he almost appeared to argue with Tavish, as if to say it wasn't wrong. I was watching from a distance and couldn't hear what was being said, but it was clear the employee looked angry. Tavish mostly just looked surprised. Soon, another employee came over and started talking to them. Eventually, Tavish returned to me with an amused look on his face. He said the guy got all mad for no reason after messing up the order. The coworker told Tavish he was right and the first employee would remake the drink. Tavish said he thought something was wrong with the first employee. Soon, they corrected his drink, and we both left the Starbucks. As we left, I noticed the first employee staring at us angrily. We walked back to the office and were able to finish our project. It probably took us almost another hour, but then we were done and ready to leave. It was probably close to 9 o'clock at night. We both used to park in a free lot about a 10-minute walk from the office. It seemed far, but parking close by was so expensive that it was worth it. As we walked past the Starbucks again, I jokingly commented that we couldn't go back there. Just as I said that, I saw the angry employee leaving the building. He stepped onto the sidewalk and seemed to notice us. Then he stopped near the door. We had to walk right past him, so we both ignored him and looked away. After we passed, the man started following us. He walked the same way we were going. We were immediately suspicious, because it seemed like he had been waiting for us. When we reached the end of the block and turned, he turned too. We decided to take a random turn at the next street to see what he would do, and he followed again. At that point, Tavish stopped, turned around, and called out to the man. He asked why he was following us, but the guy ignored him and just stood there, staring at us. We continued walking, and the man followed. We picked up our pace and quickly made our way back to the parking lot. By the time we got there, the man had stopped at the edge of the lot. We each went to our cars, and he didn't follow either of us. Instead, he stood near the exit, staring in our direction. It was really strange. As we drove out, we both passed him. He stared at us with a creepy look on his face. After that, we never went back to that Starbucks. I work at Starbucks, and this is something that happened a couple of months ago. I've been working there for about a year, and at the time, I often worked until close. I could close the place by myself, and that's what I was going to do on this particular night during a longer shift. I started work at 1 p.m. and was scheduled to finish at 8:30 p.m. when we closed. Usually, things didn't get too busy other than during a few hours in the morning. On this day, I didn't have to deal with the morning rush since I started later. After 7 p.m., things got especially quiet. The place was completely empty except for the occasional customer. It was just me and one other coworker. At about 8 p.m., roughly 30 minutes before we closed, a man walked in. He was a bigger guy, maybe in his mid-40s. He approached the counter, and I walked over to ask what he'd like. The man simply asked me what time we closed. I told him 8:30, and he just turned around and walked out. I thought it was strange, but I didn't give it much thought. After he left, nobody else came in. Around 8:15, my coworker left, and I started cleaning up and putting things away. At exactly 8:30, I was about to walk over to lock the doors when the front door opened. It was the same man from earlier. I had a bad feeling about this. He knew we closed at 8:30, I had told him myself. I thought he was either trying to make me mad or something worse. I went back behind the counter and told the man we were closed. He didn't say anything. Instead, he kept walking toward me. He approached the counter, then moved to the side and started coming around to the employee-only area. I told him he wasn't allowed back there, but he ignored me. As he continued coming closer, I quickly moved to the side, jumped onto the counter, and crawled over it as fast as I could. Once I was on the other side, I sprinted for the door, but when I saw the man running toward me, I changed direction and headed for the bathrooms instead. I made it inside the bathroom and locked the door just seconds before the man reached me. These bathrooms had full locking doors, so he couldn't get in. Moments later, I heard him pounding on the door. I asked him what he wanted, but his only response was to demand that I open the door. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Hoping to scare him off, I shouted that I was calling the police. At first, it didn't seem to work. The man walked away, but he soon returned and began pounding on the door again. At one point, it sounded like he grabbed a chair or something similar and slammed it against the door. I was terrified. He hit the door several more times before I finally heard his footsteps moving toward the front door of the building. Moments later, I heard the door open and close. Even then, I stayed in the bathroom, afraid he might be pretending to leave. The building remained silent until the police arrived. When they got there, I finally came out. I told them what happened, and they began looking around the area. One officer stayed with me to ask more questions, while another searched nearby. Surprisingly, they found a man matching the description walking in a nearby parking lot. He was detained for the incident, and I had to fill out a report. Finally, about an hour later, I was able to go home. That was by far the craziest thing that's ever happened to me while working there. I used to work at Starbucks several years ago. This was by far the creepiest thing that ever happened to me while I worked there. One night, I was closing after a really busy day. All the other employees had already left, but I stayed back to clean. We'd had customers inside almost all night, right up until we closed. Because of that, I had a lot to do before I could leave. This particular Starbucks was one of the larger locations, so cleaning up took some time. I started by sweeping and picking up trash around the place. It wasn't too bad, but it definitely needed some work. Then I began straightening up chairs and putting things back in place. When I got to a corner with a larger table, I suddenly noticed a man hiding underneath it. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was really hard to notice him unless you got close. I jumped back in shock, and the man looked at me but didn't move or say anything. After a few moments of stunned silence, I finally managed to speak. I told the man we were closed and that he needed to leave. He still didn't say a word. I asked him what he was doing there, but instead of answering, he quickly got out from under the table, ran to the door, and left. I was in disbelief, but also relieved that he was gone. Since the doors were already locked, I felt much safer at that point. I tried to shake it off and went back to cleaning. About 10 minutes later, I finished up, got my stuff, and headed to the front door to leave. After stepping outside, I started walking toward my car, which was the only one left in the parking lot. Near my car, there was a grassy area with a few trees, and I noticed the same man standing behind my car. My heart sank. I didn't want to go near him, but I needed to get to my car. As I approached, he stood up and looked directly at me. I stopped, unsure of what to do. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't respond. When I asked him to leave and told him it was my car, he moved, but only to the other side of the vehicle. Then he finally spoke, saying he really needed to use my car. Obviously, I wasn't going to let him. He claimed his car had broken down and started explaining, but I don't remember the details. I told him he'd need to ask someone else. At that point, the man yelled, "No." I told him if he didn't leave, I was going to call the police. He screamed back, "Go ahead." I took out my phone and dialed 911. While I was on the call, I noticed the man running behind some trees in the grassy area. Seeing my chance, I sprinted for my car, hoping to get in and leave before he changed his mind and came back. I managed to reach my car and get inside safely. As I started the engine, I saw the man re-emerge from the woods. This time, he was holding a large stick and heading toward me. I quickly backed out and drove off as fast as I could. The man wasn't able to reach me. While driving away, I explained to the 911 dispatcher what had just happened. They told me they would send an officer to the Starbucks to check if the man was still there. After that, I went straight home. I never saw the man at that Starbucks again, but I still get creeped out thinking about it. This happened back when I was in college, about 5 years ago. That year, I lived in a house just off campus with 2 roommates. The 3 of us were good friends. The house was small, but typical for college students. I had a class with one of my roommates, Jeremy, and for that class, we'd sometimes go places to study. It was a tough class, and one time we had a big project, so we decided to walk to a Starbucks a little way off campus. When we got there, it was pretty busy, but we were lucky to find an open table. We set up our laptops and notes and started working. After about 2 hours of grinding through the project, Jeremy leaned over to me and said there was a woman staring at me. I looked around, and it didn't take long to notice her. She was sitting alone on the other side of the crowded Starbucks, and she was, in fact, staring at me, but not in a good way. She was glaring at me, like she was really angry. I didn't recognize her at all. I told Jeremy I had no idea who she was. We both agreed it was weird. Over the next few minutes, I glanced over at her a few times. She wasn't staring at me every time, but I caught her doing it at least 3 more times. It made me really uncomfortable, so I decided to just ignore it. As more time passed, the Starbucks got quieter as people left. At one point, I looked up and saw her staring at me again. Shortly after that, she got up and moved to another table closer to ours. She sat down there and continued glaring at me. It was incredibly creepy. After about 5 more minutes, I told Jeremy we should go. We'd already gotten a lot done, and it was getting late anyway. We packed up our stuff and left the Starbucks. By this time, it was completely dark outside. As we walked out, I glanced back to see if the woman was leaving too. She was still sitting in the same spot, but she was looking out the window at me. I looked away quickly, and we started walking back to our house. It was about a 10-minute walk. When we got back, we went inside. I went to my room to take my things out of my backpack, but a few minutes later, I heard Jeremy call my name from the living room. I went out, and Jeremy told me, "She's back." I immediately knew who he was talking about. I looked out the front window and saw the same woman walking toward our house. But she didn't come to the door. She stopped about 20 feet away, standing in the yard and staring at our front door. Then she looked over at the window. Jeremy and I ducked down quickly. We were so creeped out. She just stood there, staring at the house. We debated calling the cops, but after about 5 minutes, the woman finally turned around and walked away. That night, we kept looking out the window to make sure she didn't come back. Thankfully, she didn't. After that, we avoided that Starbucks for a while. I did eventually go back, but I never saw the woman again. I still have no idea who she was or why she kept staring at me. It was such a strange and unsettling experience. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.